I'm Sam Basu. I'm an organizational change consultant and coach, a diversity and inclusion specialist, and also performing artist. And those last two descriptions are very important parts of my identity that I feel are so important in organizations. Both bringing in individual cultural and gender identity, as well as bringing in the arts, bringing in the livelihoods outside of work that many employees might have. So I have worked as a change lead with over 20 enterprise clients, including Sony, Cisco, Disney, and many, many more. I also have an MBA in organizational behavior from INSEAD, which is a top business school of the world in France, and also from Wharton School of Business in Pennsylvania. So in my 10 years of doing this work, I've seen almost every team situation. And I work in some interesting environments. I see common problems everywhere. Most often, I see teams siloed, not talking to each other, unaware of what the other teams are doing, unaligned, overloaded with their own work, and seemingly having to keep up with changing administrative protocols every day. And I'm often called in as a consultant to deliver a new operating model or a process improvement plan for a department. The problem is, in a team structure with so much dysfunction, I can definitely whip up a set of fancy looking PowerPoints and Excels, but I have doubts on how far they will actually go because in most cases, organizations have already built up resentment and cynicism towards management, constantly trying to change things for the better. And they're tired of seeing PowerPoints. Employees really want to see what's going to help them in their day-to-day processes in a very tactical sense. So if any of this sounds familiar to you and sounds valuable to you, then great. But if not, if you're still wondering, does your organization need a culture shift? You can go through some of these questions and see if you answer yes to any of them. Is there unclear project ownership and overload? Do project managers, for example, feel like there's too much going on at once? Is there a lack of motivation and incentive? Is there an us versus them mentality? Is there status quo kind of thinking where this is how it is, I can't talk to so-and-so and it's not going to change? Are there unclear processes, for example, when you have a new team member onboarding, or do they have a clear set of processes that they go through? Is there hierarchy limiting progress? Is there enough communication across different levels of the organization? Is there a good understanding of metrics? Is there a good understanding cross-functionally across IT and business? And is technology limiting or not enabling collaboration? A very common one. So if you're like most organizations, you probably answered yes to at least one or two of these. And there's nothing wrong with you. That's the good news. The good news is that there's still a lot of growth that can be done in your culture and in your communication to become more agile, more dynamic, and this program offers you kind of a step-by-step process and tools for helping your organization grow as a whole. So I want to kind of take a step back and, let's get out of the business context and look at the major systems that we see in the world. And what we'll find is that just like in our organizations, silos and segregation exist in all of the major systems we see in the world. So if you think of social, cultural, and religious groups, if you think of political regimes, countries, if you think of even individuals, personality types, you have the creatives and then you have the analyticals, and they're usually divided. And then, of course, in organizations, within organizational functions. So why does this happen? Why do we have so much siloing? Why do we have these divisions? And the reason for that, the answer to that, is that we as human beings are really driven by a fear of change and difference. And that's really hardwired into us from, when we began as mankind. We really have an addiction to comfort and to certainty and having control and a sense of structure on who we're interacting with. And we don't we don't very naturally challenge ourselves to go out of our comfort zones. So why is that? We can really tie it back to Maslow's hierarchy of needs, which many of you may be familiar with. So at the base of the hierarchy, we have safety and physiological needs, and these are our needs for, basic shelter, food, water, safety from harm, safety from danger. And as you know, we have been protecting ourselves from predators and trying to, get our food and get our shelter and get ourselves situated since we began, since we were very primal. And so what you probably haven't thought about is that these initial needs that we were driven by were really driven out of fear. There were the need for basic survival. So we are really hardwired in our brains to operate in that way, where we're just operating for survival. But the thing is that, our lives, our society has evolved and become so much more complex where, now we don't really have to worry as much about, luckily, about how we're going to eat and where we're going to sleep and if we're going to be safe from harm. Mostly, we can focus our efforts more on the higher needs, which are love and belonging, esteem, autonomy, and then self-actualization, which is fulfilling our potential. And that's really where growth comes in. That's where we can stop focusing on our fear and we can start focusing on a different part of our brains, which is really responsible for rational thinking and for self-actualization, for fulfilling potential. And this is all really tied to neuroscience. If you look at our brains and the way they've evolved, we actually developed the prefrontal cortex, which is a completely different part of the brain, later in evolution, once our needs became more complex and we were able to focus more energy on our growth needs. So what we can see is that we need growth to sustain over time. And this is another kind of big picture view, and I love to kind of tie everything into the big picture. I like to, apply frameworks from different places and see, where can we apply them in our businesses. So what we can see is that at a deeper level, growth is really nature's way. Nothing stays the same no matter how much we attempt to keep it the same. So, no matter how much we use anti-aging creams and Botox to try to stop ourselves from aging and getting old, it's still an inevitable process. We are always growing. And so nature is actually in a way telling us that growth is desirable. Staying the way we are in the status quo is undesirable. And we can see indeed in our businesses, we need growth to sustain over time. We need to be making more money, capturing more share of the market, getting more resources, having more peace in our organizations, creating more long-term value for our customers in order to not get taken over by a competitor. So the problem is, although we really should be focusing more of our energy and our efforts on our growth, on our business development, as well as our self-development, most employees are actually more in short-term thinking than they are in long-term thinking. So most employees have the mentality of, just getting the job done, making it through the day, doing everything right, not getting into trouble, and then getting home, getting on the couch and watching Netflix. And so what is that? That's obviously a lack of motivation, and it's a mentality that's really driven by fear. And when you think about it, it's not completely rational. It's a pretty way of operating that's very hardwired in us to be very day-to-day and operation-focused. Whereas the long-term way of thinking is, how can we improve what we're doing? How can we actually change what we're doing day-to-day to meet our customers' deepest needs before someone else does? And that's the mentality that's driven by growth. It's the mentality that's really, strategic and looking at long-term, how can we keep ourselves sustainable? And right below, I added this quote that I just love and that I bring to all of my clients that I have to remind them of, that in the long run, the adaptive organization and person wins. The fearful organization loses. And that is so important. And that is all about culture change. So, as I keep saying, we are hardwired to ignore the deeper values, ignore the long-term value that we're creating. And most of us, especially, lower level employees, are focused on processes, are focused on the short-term value. And so, what we really want to do as part of culture change is have everyone thinking strategically, have everyone, kind of vested in the company's long-term success and, seeing the many benefits of change, because that's the only way we're really going to get our workforce to change. That's the only way things are really going to transform for the better. And so, some simple things, but very important, reinforcing through constant reminders of our values and mission, because, our employees can be so caught up in the weeds of things that they can forget that, hey, our value is collaboration at the heart of our success. So we shouldn't be just staying in our silos. We should be reaching out more across different teams and finding out how we can be of more value and how we can create synergies. So this is one of the initial tools that I bring in to companies and organizations. It's pretty much a scorecard across people, processes, and tools. A very easy way to look at your culture from the angle of people, processes, and technology, and from there really prioritize. The items in red probably are the ones that need the most immediate work. And so then you can plan your change journey, your culture change journey, using something like this. So, all the talk about change is great, but as we know as change managers, as we know as leaders, balancing change with business as usual is such an important aspect. We don't want to bring any big bang changes where, we're suddenly changing the values and mission, because this is really, equal to kind of changing the sense of self for organization. I'm stuttering, sorry. We want to be open to changing everything around strategy, around, operating processes and the way we're doing things, but never change the values and the mission, because we need that core sense of identity of the organization. Celebrate the things that are working. Don't disrupt the business processes that are working, and celebrate the skills that our people have, but then be willing to slowly, gradually add new habits that are really consciously planned and paced so that it doesn't frustrate our organizations and our teams. So why empathy is a topic that, I could just do a whole course on, but I want to give this in a nutshell, because we don't have that much time here. So why is it important to cultivate empathy in our workforce, in our team members? So in order to understand ourselves and our role, we need to understand clearly how an entire system works, how an entire organization works, and only then can we really see how we fit in and how we are really adding value. So that's the only way we can really understand our contribution in the value chain and how we are impacting other functions, and ultimately how we're impacting the customer. So why empathy is, this is really telling us, why do we need to get out of our own box and out of our own needs and discover what the needs of the entire organization are? That's how we can really provide the most value in our roles, and that's where we really take a more proactive rather than reactive stance. The last point I want to make is just unbelievably important. Tracking metrics, developing KPIs and tracking them to enforce new behaviors, and really socializing these KPIs across the organization. This really helps to make change clear and precise, and it makes it very tangible, because a lot of these things, especially when we're working with IT organizations. A lot of the change management, the culture change, and the communications work can seem very fluffy and soft, and that's why we really need to back it up with KPIs that matter to the organization. So things like the number of hours saved through collaboration, money saved through collaboration, new opportunities created, time taken to resolve cases through collaboration. And we can really, tie a lot of these into changes in culture by just looking at, how much more data is being shared between teams that's reducing the amount of work that's being done. So that's really core to making this case for change. So I want to wrap up by just saying what I always say, which is, in the long run, the most adaptive win, the fearful lose. We see that from human evolution. We see that everywhere. That is pretty much what the universe is telling us, that in order to win, we need to be able to adapt, and we need to be able to do it fast. So, if this information has piqued your interest at all, if you think it will be of value to your organization, and trust me, it will be whether you know it right now or not, then let's work together. I would love to bring my experience, insights, versatile skills to helping refresh your organization's culture to be more collaborative, more agile, and responsive to changing stakeholder needs. So our 6-month culture and communication program gives you, in addition to my consulting and coaching, a complete step-by-step guide and toolkit for culture change at your organization that you'll find will positively benefit motivation, productivity, proactiveness, and strategic thinking on every level of your organization, which is really exactly what you need to get to the next level of your business. So if you said yes to any of the questions in the beginning culture checklist, then this program is exactly what you need. And I encourage you to not wait and actually get on it now. Why? Because all of the other things you're doing, the deliverables you're having created, the changes you're making can only be successful when you have the right culture and foundation at the backbone supporting it. I can't wait to work with you, and thank you so much.